right. Sandra,
So Jessica, do you just want me to start?
Yeah, thank you.
God sent me a friend suggestion, God's butterfly effect. Oh, there's a lot in that title that needs explaining, right? First, I think that most of us are familiar with the social media application, Facebook, where we can each connect with friends around the world. People who find us on Facebook can send us friend requests, and we have the option to confirm or delete the request. Or we can find others on Facebook and send them friend requests, which they can confirm or delete. But there's a third way to connect with people I know, and that's to have one of my Facebook friends make a friend suggestion, offering me the option of adding someone that we both know to my list of friends. It's this third option of friend finding that resonates with my Bible study. A minor change, such as flapping of wings by a butterfly, can create a phenomenal change. It's called the butterfly effect. It's popularly believed that the name butterfly effect comes from this idea that the actions of a small, seemingly insignificant insect can have monumental results halfway around the world, like a typhoon. However, the butterfly effect, more accurately, gets its name from the figure below, the graph of possible outcomes. So I have become fascinated with biblical butterfly effects, as well as trying to see how those seemingly insignificant changes apply to our own lives. Have you ever realized, in looking back, that you just happened to be in the exact right place at the exact right time? Within a closed system, when all initial events are known, the butterfly graph charts the possible results when one initial event is changed. But our universe is not a closed system to us, nor are we aware of each and every initial event at any given point in time. But God is. The butterfly effect attempts to make predictions, but hindsight is all we have in an open universe. I can't know in advance that I'm needed in that certain place at that certain time. I have to rely upon God's direction, and I have to be willing to respond to his nudge when it comes. Okay, back to Facebook. I'm using the social media analogy of God sending me a friend suggestion to refer to those times when God nudges me into the right place at the right time and hands me the script that he needs me to read. For example, years ago, I called a friend 2 states away to get an address I couldn't find. She gasped when she heard it was me on the phone. I can't believe you called. I was just putting on my coat to go see a divorce lawyer. Talk to me instead. In those instances, and many more, I felt that God has sent me friend suggestions, people who needed me right then, right now. And how does the butterfly effect figure into this? If I look carefully into the past, I can see the fingerprints of God on earlier events that have set the stage for my being able to intervene effectively. But let's start by examining a biblical example that is very clearly defined by God's word. I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Genesis 45, 4-7. God had sent Pharaoh a friend's suggestion, delivered to him by his chief cupbearer, befriend Joseph. Now in the morning, Pharaoh's spirit was troubled. So he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. And then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Pharaoh was furious with his servants, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. We had a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a young Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream, and just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him. Genesis 41, 8-13. We know the background on this one, but let's look how it all fits together.
Do we want to transfer here? That might be a good transition. So Anne, if you'd like to take over.
Okay. We know the background on this one, but let's look at how it all fits together. Jacob shows favoritism by giving Joseph a special coat. Joseph has 2 dreams that suggest that he will be superior to his brother. Sibling rivalry. The plot. Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery to Midianite traders who sell Joseph to Potiphar in Egypt. Training. Joseph becomes overseer of Potiphar's household. God brings Potiphar success on account of Joseph. But then, the setup. Potiphar's wife falsely accuses Joseph of attempted rape. Potiphar has Joseph thrown into jail. More training. God gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. Joseph became supervisor of all prisoners and everything within the jail. The dreams. God gives Joseph the correct interpretations of dreams. The cupbearer returns to work for the Pharaoh and lives. The baker dies. And then God caused Pharaoh to dream. 7 skinny fat cows that ate up 7 fat cows. 7 thin ears of grain that swallowed up 7 plump ears. This is the point at which God sent Pharaoh a friend suggestion via his cupbearer, befriend Joseph. As Joseph explained to his brothers, God sent me before you to preserve life. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. God provided Joseph with training in supply management and in supervising people working under him. God also put Joseph in Egypt for years, giving him the time and opportunity to learn their language and culture in preparation for being the second in command in the entire country. God provided a scenario that gave Joseph the credentials and contacts he needed to come to Pharaoh's attention. So what have we learned thus far? 1, sometimes God trains us for future jobs in his service immediately after we've had devastating setbacks. 2, sometimes God sends us unlikely friend suggestions that are delivered in unlikely circumstances. We shouldn't judge those whom God puts into our paths. 3, sometimes the most unlikely people become God's angels, that is, messengers, who deliver his friend suggestions. Again, don't judge. 4, sometimes God sets his butterfly effect into motion years before the results are evident. Trust the process. 5, whether we see it or not at the time, we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. 6, most importantly, God is always in charge. Are you ready for another biblical example of a friend suggestion from God? This one involves one of Daniel's prophecies, some wise men and baby Jesus. The details of Daniel's prophecy of 7 weeks are a bit hard to follow. Just know that 1, Daniel was living in the Medo-Persian Empire at the time that he was given the prophecy. 2, it's likely that Daniel shared this knowledge with his fellow wise men with whom he served the Persian court, and 3, the wise men, having had the prophecy handed down through generations, would have been expecting the birth of the anointed one. That reasoning demonstrates God's butterfly effect, a prophecy spoken to Daniel rippled through through generations to accurately predict the meaning of an astrological phenomenon that appeared 5 centuries later. But what about God's friend suggestion, given to the wise men to ensure that they would seek out Jesus? Why was it important that the wise men find him? Let's examine what we know of their visit.
Okay, let's transition to Martha.
Traveling from the east, once the star appeared at the time of Jesus' birth, the wise men would have arrived after Jesus was born. Therefore, having heard their story, Herod ordered all boys 2 years and under in Bethlehem to be murdered. But by that time, Joseph had already left for Egypt with his young family. The Mosaic law required that Mary be considered unclean for 40 days after childbirth. Then, when the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and Mary took Jesus to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. Luke 2:22-24. When the days of her purification for a son or daughter are over, she is to bring to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or dove for a sin offering. But if she cannot afford a lamb, she's to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. Leviticus 12:6-8. If the wise men had arrived any time within Mary's 40-day period of separation, surely she would have used their gifts to purchase a lamb instead of bringing the sacrifice of the poor. So it's likely that the wise men brought their gifts sometime thereafter, closer to the family's flight to Egypt. All 3 presents alluded to the work of Jesus as our high priest. However, to repeat an earlier question, what about God's friend suggestion given to the wise men to ensure that they would seek out Jesus? Why was it important that the wise men find him? And why was it important that they arrive after Mary's purification? Instead of buying a lamb for Mary's purification sacrifice, these precious gifts of gold, myrrh, and frankincense would easily have bankrolled a poor family's escape to Egypt. How intricately God wove together all the elements of his only begotten son's birth and flight to safety in Egypt. Throughout the Bible, we can find many other friend suggestions sent by God. Technically, that was the job description of God's prophets. Let's look at a few. God's friend suggestion. Daniel, befriend Nebuchadnezzar and interpret his dream. Response, Nebuchadnezzar accepted Daniel's friend request. Elijah, befriend King Ahab and tell him why there's going to be 3.5 years of drought. Friend request deleted. Jonah, befriend the Assyrians so they can repent and live. Jonah initially ignored God's friend suggestion. Jeremiah, befriend the Jews in Jerusalem and warn them to change or be killed. Friend request deleted. Jews mount a cyberbullying campaign aimed at Jeremiah. There are also biblical examples of people other than prophets to whom God made friend suggestions. For example, God's friend suggestion. Slave girl, befriend Naaman's wife. Tell her to tell him to send a friend request to Elijah. Response, the king of Aram sends Naaman's name as a friend suggestion to Elijah, but When Elijah sends back a friend request to Naaman, he's initially blocked. Eventually, Naaman unblocks him. Peter, befriend Cornelius the centurion. Peter hesitates. Cornelius, befriend Peter the apostle. Peter rethinks the request and accepts. And of course, there are numerous examples of angels being sent out with friend suggestions. Remember that the Greek word for angel means messenger. They always comply, but the responses have been varied. God's friend suggestion. Befriend Lot and his family. Get them out of Sodom. Response. Lot accepts the friend request, but then is slow to answer his messages. Befriend Moses. Tell him to befriend Pharaoh. Moses forwards the friend suggestion to his brother, Aaron. Befriend Sarah and tell her that she's going to have a baby. Sarah laughs off the friend request. Gabriel, befriend Mary, who's engaged to Joseph. Mary accepts the friend request. May it be done to me according to your word. Luke 1:8. Shall we explore one more biblical example of God's butterfly effect? I've already alluded to this one in the examples of friend suggestions delivered by angels. Once again, we know the background on this one, but let's look at how it all fits together. God multiplies the Hebrews. Pharaoh fears a revolt and orders that all male Hebrew babies are killed. That's the threat. The rescue. Jochebed floats baby Moses on the Nile River when she can no longer hide him. Pharaoh's daughter takes the baby as her own child. And the training? Until weaned, Moses learns the Hebrew customs and language. In Pharaoh's palace, Moses is educated to read, write, and lead. But then, flight. Moses kills an Egyptian who is beating a Hebrew slave. Pharaoh tries to kill Moses, who escapes to Midian. More training. Moses learns the ways of the Midianites. As a shepherd, Moses learns the wilderness terrain and Mount Horeb or Sinai. It's time. Moses' stepfather dies, removing his death threat. God hears the groanings of the Hebrew slaves and remembers his covenant with them. Playing a bit with the dialogue, God said, Moses, befriend Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go. Moses, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? Befriend the Hebrew slaves too. I've got your back. How can I prove that it's not a fraudulent request? Remind them that I was friends with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What do I do if the slaves ignore my friend request? I'll give you special credentials. A rod that turns into a snake, leprosy that comes and goes, water that turns into blood. I'm not good with technology. God said, trust me. Who do you think created the technology? Moses said, unsure of his Hebrew, which he hasn't spoken for at least 40 years. Moses replies, please forward the friend's suggestions to someone else. Okay, that's enough pushback, Moses. Your brother Aaron is fluent in Hebrew. I've already messaged him to meet you here. Moses finally accepts the friend's suggestion, returns to Midian to collect his family and say his goodbyes, and goes back to Mount Horeb to meet up with Aaron. Together, the brothers send friend requests to the Hebrews, who accept. So the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord was concerned about the sons of Israel, and that he had seen their affliction, then they bowed low and worshiped. Exodus 4:31. Let's pull this together. Moses' first 80 years prepared him for his final 40 years. His experience was exposure to Hebrew culture and language during the developmental window when children learn languages best. The benefit was acceptance by Hebrew slaves as their leader. Formal education in Pharaoh's court, where he learned to read and write, and skills needed to write the first 5 books of the Bible. Training to be a leader in Egypt, and skills needed to lead a new nation. Learning the terrain in the wilderness, having a map in his head of the area to be traversed. Training as a shepherd, understanding how to be the good shepherd of his people. Familiarity with Midianite culture and language. Per God's command, Moses waged war of the Midianites because of their evil influence on the Israelites. Recap what we have learned. Sometimes God trains us for future jobs in his service immediately after we've had devastating setbacks. Sometimes God sends us unlikely friend suggestions that are delivered in unlikely circumstances. We shouldn't judge those whom God puts into our paths. Sometimes the most unlikely people become God's angels or messengers who deliver his friend suggestions. Again, don't judge. Sometimes God sets his butterfly effect into motion years before the results are evident. Trust the process. Whether we see it or not at the time, we know that God causes all things to work together for good, to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. And most importantly, God is always in charge. It's my intent to continue to watch for God's butterfly effects and friend suggestions as I study his word. For example, I recently read Paul's remark in Philippians 1:12-14 with a new understanding. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. But for now, I'd like to end with your thoughts about your experiences. When have you seen the butterfly effect in your own life or someone else's? A time when God set factors into motion long before you needed them. When have you felt as though God sent you a friend's suggestion, someone in whose life he wanted you to intervene? When have you benefited from someone else's unexpected intervention in your life? Thank you.
Okay, any discussion on that? Thank you very much. And you'll have to unmute if you want to comment because everyone's muted.
I have one quick
2 weeks ago, I had a perfect example of this, Deb, and others. There was a call for teachers for teaching English to students from the Bible, so in Cambodia, so they could learn English and also learn about the Bible. And the program was ready to be shut down because nobody had replied. And because my daughter has a couple of students from Cambodia and we knew about the program, I suggested that my mentee, because she had said when she asked me to be her mentor on the WCF Faith Launch program, she had said the reason she contacted me was because of the service that I had done in the truth, and she wanted to be able to serve, find a place where she could serve. And all of a sudden I said, that is who needs to be on this program. And within 2 days, she was teaching 2 students, and that was just 2 weeks ago. She's already had 4 classes, and she is so thrilled. She said last week, it just made her week to think that she's able to do something to serve God and still have her job and still have her life, and be able to participate in this way. And to me, that is just the answer of prayer in so many times over.
Yeah.
That's a great example.
I have an
Margaret,
example.
go ahead.
I have an example that's kind of recent. I've been teaching a young lady named Charlotte since she was 8. I teach violin for a living. And I also have this husband who, because he has dementia and Parkinson's disease, needs to have a caregiver when I am going back to work, which is going to happen soon. These days I'm teaching video lessons, which aren't great. And I was kind of wondering what I should do about finding a caregiver. And in the meantime, I'm also kind of watching the situation with Charlotte's family, which unfortunately was kind of falling apart. And she graduated from high school, and she didn't have any prospects for the future. And but during the course of our conversations, one day she said that she was taking care of somebody. That said, one of the things she liked to do is take care of people. So Charlotte is now my caregiver, and she's working out really well. And we've been given the opportunity of helping Charlotte move forward with life and get going. And she's doing us the immense service of being a really wonderful caregiver for my husband. So that would be an example set up years ago. So.
Nice.
I was going to mention that I was baptized in 1971, and I observed since that time that within the first 2 years after many people I have known were baptized, they all went through, including me, some kind of trial that strengthened their faith. And I at first I thought it was just me, but I've just watched over time, and it's still happening.
Yeah.
They
It
might
does.
be in an accident, they might be sick, they might be in hard circumstances of some kind or other. But behind those trials, as Deb said, comes strength, and it prepares you for what you need to do later. In my career, it took 20 years of learning of different kinds of subjects, just like Moses and Daniel for that matter, that I eventually used it in the last 7 years of my working life. And I had no idea that's why I was learning so many different. My mother wondered why I kept switching jobs, but I needed all of that to be able to do what I did. I love the butterfly effect. That is perfect way to put it.
It is a perfect way. I really appreciated that. And I also appreciated the 3 sisters that read. I think you did a very good job and put the emphasis in the right way. I'm sure that Deb would have been pleased with that.
You know, when we go through those things, as Deb's calling the friend's request or the butterfly effect, you know, sometimes it's not easy to go through. You think of these people in the Bible. Think about Daniel, you know, being 14 years old, one of the brightest and best, being ripped from his family and taken to Babylon and becoming a eunuch. That must not have been easy. And so, you know, many of us won't have to go through those kind of things, but always looking at it and stepping back, like Deb has said, is what's so important. I don't know that I have anything to share, but I think that that's what the point is when things are tough. And surround yourself with people who might help you question what's happening and why.
Part of the friend's request thing too is to look at the people that have been put in your life that seem to come out of the blue. And why are they in your life at that moment in time? Because I have found that to be true too. And afterward, I realized there was a weakness in my character in some way. And that was how God used that person to help me, and hopefully I helped them to strengthen both of us. It's a win-win for both.
And sometimes it's kind of annoying. Like it's not very pleasant all the time. And maybe that's when you need to step back and say, hey, what's going on?
Yeah, but I think it's hard to see it when you're in the present sometimes. I do remember kind of an interesting prayer at Bible class one night. Bible class was at my house, and I picked up my dad from the assisted living, and he wasn't going to drive anymore, and he wanted to give the car to somebody, but we just didn't know who to give it to. So he was kind of worried about that. Well, the last prayer of the day was by Nicholas Pratt, and he prayed to God to also give them a needed car for their family. It was like, well, we didn't know that. And we never talked about that, but that was so clear. It's like, wow, this prayer is being answered right now.
Excuse me. Yes.
Okay, any other comments?
I just want to say there's a sister in Richmond right now who's going through, she's been through chemo. She went through surgery and she has to have more. And her husband said, we just have to go with the flow. He said, we just have to totally be open to what God has for our lives at this point, which is harder, but it's easier when you totally give it up to God to let him direct things, because he knows the end from the beginning and all the ways in between. So that butterfly effect is really appreciated by them.
I think too, God's timing is very, very significant in all of this. God's timing is always right.
Mm-hmm.
When the time was right, the flood came. When the time was right, the stone was moved, rolled away. God's timing has always been right. And that's what we have to acknowledge in our own lives. It doesn't seem right to us lots of times, but
Mm-hmm.
God's timing is right.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on that before we, yes, Deb is going to type something for us. Toby Mac has a new song out with the lyrics, God's never early, but he's never late.
There's also a saying that when you pray for something and God doesn't say yes or no, a lot of times the answer is not yet. Because I've also, as part of the friend effect, I've also observed that people who are looking for jobs or mates or a lot of different things, if it had happened at the time that the person wanted it to happen, those factors, as Sandra said, don't exist. But when the things are all put together, that's when the prayer is answered.
I've also found as well that when it may not be major, but it's urgent at that time, that I've had answers right away. And those answers has given me the reassurance that when something the answers don't seem to be there, I know that God heard. So I gives me the confidence to wait.
I want to say one specific thing to Maggie. You have encouraged recently Mike Cody in some illustrations, I think, for the Bible.
Well, he's been doing it for me.
Okay, well, it's a needed connection, and I told them how wonderful you are, and I'm so happy that you all made that connection, honestly. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
There are lots of trials in their life. So,
well, you know what? I asked for help with something and he volunteered. So I feel that really blessed to have his help.
He's amazing. He's an
really
amazing
good.
artist. Yes, yes. So it's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank God for this connection. I don't know how you
Thank you,
got that.
Martha. I think you misled him though, telling him how wonderful I am.
I know, I always thought Martha was a good judge of character, but
It's enough of you, Jessica.
okay. Well, next we have my mother.
Yay.
You're gonna have to unmute. And do you want questions as they come up or comments as they come up, or do you want people to wait?
Let's wait until the end.
Okay.
Do you want us all to take a 2-minute break?
I'm gonna run to the restroom, so if we want to take a break, that would be great.
Be
Let's-
That's
fine.
what I thought might be good.
It's 12:56, so let's start back at 1-ish.
Okay.
Ish.
Mary, you get a break too.
Okay,
Mary gets to take a deep breath.
yeah.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed Deb's class. She's always
Mhm.
so detailed,
Mhm.
very good.
So
I
thought-
was interested in, although she didn't mention this, but interested in the timing of the wise men arriving. That to me is very, very significant. And I don't think we stress it enough. That we know that they were in a house and it was a child. And to me, it says when Herod made that declaration that all children under 2 had to be killed, it gave John the Baptist time to escape, and it gave Mary and Joseph the time to get to Egypt. But because we know John the Baptist was not killed, and he was 6 months older than Jesus. So
Right.
that timing to me is just so significant. Yeah. I think a lot of these interactions that Deb is trying to get us to look at, you only see them in hindsight too. And that's important, to look for the hand of God along the way, but also after the fact. Because boy, you can see the hand of God if you look for it.
Sometimes we have to listen for that still small voice.
Mhm.
Exactly. And sometimes it is just a still small voice, like the wind. Yeah.
I just think back to the idea that God has his timing right. Think of like Sodom and Gomorrah, when those angels were, they needed to get them out of there immediately. Like the time was happening. It was going to happen at a certain time, and they really needed to get out of there. I think of things like Noah's Ark. Like, I think God will allow that to be seen again when it's the right time for the world to know, once again, to really proclaim that, yep, this really happened. You know.
But even with Sodom and Gomorrah, the angels didn't know the timing. The angels didn't know ahead. They had to be directed by God. They had to be listening to God's instructions, because they seemed to be totally in the lurch about this whole thing. Like there were 3 that went to Abraham, only 2 went to Sodom, 1 stayed behind. Like the whole thing, you know that the angels are just going in the moment. And that's too what we have to do, one day at a time, in the moment.
I think we've got Carol's music.
Pretty music.
That was kind of
Muted her.
nice. That was kind of nice.
Okay, that was good timing. I needed to get my lunch. So,
And
Um,
Carol and Phyllis is getting her tea, which is good. Glad you're still with us. I don't know what you're saying. You're on mute.
who are
You're
you-
muted, Phyllis.
Sorry, yeah. I was just wondering whether to turn my camera off, whether you all want to see me munching.
I'm going to be
That's okay.
munching too. So whatever you feel comfortable with. Just keep
Jessica does it all the time when we're on readings at night. She's always eating.
Maggie.
It's
That's
true.
Okay.
No secret. We all see you.
All right. Martha, you didn't leave me any rice last night.
I thought about that this morning.
So
I'm
I'm
sorry.
eating orange chicken riceless,
Oh, no.
but I'm sure it'll
Orange
still.
chicken sounds good.
It is so good.
Yeah, sure.
I've just been reading research on rice, and it has a lot of arsenic in it. So
It
you
does.
have to take it in small amounts.
I think
I was blown away. I thought rice was a good thing to eat, but apparently rice baby food is like probably the worst thing you can give a baby.
Is
I
that
think
There's so much
Jasmine-
arsenic in it.
What they say about rice is you ought to soak it in hot water for like 5 minutes and then you rinse it out to get the arsenic out. Yeah.
I think jasmine
Right.
rice is
But
also.
who knew that?
I didn't.
We have Vietnamese friends, and we used to visit them, and they'd always soak their rice and then rinse them. And I rinsed it, and I guess they've got the
The
understanding. of
memo.
that. Yeah, I guess so.
I got a recipe for crock pot pineapple chicken the other night and I made it and it was so good that I thought I'm going to try this with other things. So I made it again last night with orange chicken. Same recipe, just orange marmalade instead of pineapple. And it was so good.
Another thing about rice, the Japanese, when they cook it, it's almost like a ritual and a rite to wash the rice. They do it very gently, very caringly to rinse that rice first. So
Yep.
Okay, well, on that note, you can go ahead.
Well, for those who don't know me, I'm Sister Mary Miller from North Little Rock, Arkansas. Jessica, most of you know, is my daughter, but I also have a son, Kyle. His wife, Carolyn, may still be on here. She didn't show her face, though.
I think she left.
Okay. And I have two grandsons, Levi, 9, and Dawson, 6. And they bring me lots of pleasure, bring lots of activity into my life, and keep me young. Well, my class today is called An Appreciation of Sewing from the Garden to the Present. So, of course, we're going to start with Adam and Eve. In Genesis 3:7, it says, "And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons." This was right after they partook of the fruit that they weren't supposed to eat of, and they tried to hide from God. So these fig leaves, these aprons would have been very hastily sewn together, probably by taking the stem of one leaf and just making a little hole in the next leaf and just weaving them together that way. If you ever made the little clover chains or little daisy chains, that's kind of the way you would do. You take a fingernail even and make a little hole, and that way you could make the little necklaces and little wreaths for your head. And I think it's pretty much the way they would have done, and they would have used what was at hand. But we see from Genesis 3:21 that this was not acceptable to God. Unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothe them. We know that there was a lesson in this. There was a reason. It wasn't just that God didn't like fig leaves. He had to show them that an animal had to die in their place. But how long did they have to wear these coverings? Did they have to wear them forever, all their lives? Or did they just wear them until they had learned the meaning? We don't know this, but God would have given them very specific instructions about the sacrifices as to what, when, where, and how to do them. So did they get a new covering each time they made a sacrifice? I don't know. Maybe later some of you will have some ideas on this. But at some point in time, it became okay to go back to a plant for clothing. We don't know who the first ones who started this. We don't know how it came about. It would have been a very gradual process. Well, we know that things were not plentiful to Adam because he was told that by the sweat of his brow, he would till the garden and it would not yield to him his strength. We know that God would have provided plenty for them, but there probably was not a lot of plant food around for them to use. But this is all just speculation. But flax in that area later became very popular, and it was a very durable fabric. The process for doing this was very painstaking. I believe they had to soak the flax, and then they had to get it into some form where they could weave it. We don't know who did this. It generally fell to the women to do the sewing because the men were doing the heavier work. Many Egyptian paintings and mosaics have survived. Well, they had the tombs, so they had a lot of things that were in there. The paintings that are a lot of things that are just now being revealed. But if you look at these depictions, they had flax, they had loincloths. Most of the men wore loincloths, the workers, but the rulers wore some very intricate designs. So who made all of these things? I don't think that each ruler had, their wives probably didn't do it. They had someone who had to have learned this process to make all these things. In the tomb of King Tut, there were found at least 30 garments. Now, these were put in there for him to take to his afterlife, so he would have plenty of clothes. They had, most of them consisted of just simple tunics, just big loose things. That seemed to be the outfit of choice for the men and the women. But then they had these elaborately colored shawls, and some of them measured at least 14 feet long. So they would wrap those around. And in King Tut's tomb, they also found underwear. They were just triangular garments, much like a diaper, but they were probably tied at the waist some way with a sash. But it's just amazing to me to think about what all these people did. Now, in some of the paintings or depictions, there were young girls being taught how to weave. So it had to be a massive process to get all of the flax into a condition to be woven. But some of these girls were standing at looms that were gigantic. They were against the wall, and someone was teaching them how to do this. So a lot of these things must have been woven all in one big piece, especially the shawls. And I think there would have been classes also for others learning how to sew these, to connect them. But I'm amazed at the things that were made in the wilderness. When God gave Moses instructions to construct the tabernacle, he chose special people to do this. And in Exodus 25, we read starting with verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel that they bring me an offering. Of every man that giveth it willingly with his heart, ye shall take my offering. And this is the offering which ye shall take of them: gold and silver and brass, and blue and purple and scarlet, and fine linen and goat's hair, and ram skins dyed red, and badger skin. He was very specific in the things he needed. But there was another verse, I'm not sure where it was, but it said Moses sought out people who were wise of heart. I think this means a little bit more. I think they were educated, or they were teachable, or they could teach other people how to do. But some people had to head this up. Moses delegated these tasks. He couldn't do it all himself. But the people had these things ready to donate. So where did they get them? Some of them, they had to have brought them with them from Egypt when they fled. It was said that everybody borrowed from their neighbors. They borrowed jewels and precious stones and clothes. But still, what a huge task. It took so many people. I wonder how they were able, once they got the fabric, at what point did they color it? Did they color it before it was wove? Did they color it afterwards? But all the various colors for these curtains of the hangings in the temple, it's just amazing to me. And what did they sew with? In a cave in Siberia, they have found a lot of needles. And of course, they date them from thousands of years ago. We don't know how far back, but some of the earliest ones were made of stone. Probably in the very beginning, what they did with the heavier fabrics, especially, or the more loosely woven ones, they probably just made holes in the fabric and wove it with vines or other pieces of flax, maybe even animal skins. This is something we're not told. But when it came to constructing the tabernacle in the wilderness, it couldn't have been so loosely done or haphazardly done. It had to hold up to the stress, the wear and tear. It had to be taken down and put back up many times. The badger skins or ram skins, whatever, were colored. And these were for the protection of it, so the rain and the wind wouldn't get in. But also, at some point in time, archaeologists discovered a big chunk of something that they believe might have been a primitive, very primitive sewing machine. I would like to think this was possible for some of the heavier work, especially. They believe this machine had a place for a pulley with a belt. And some of you may remember the machines that had belts. The one I use now doesn't have, but it hasn't been too long ago that mine did have. It had a wheel and the belt that powered it. But even the treadle sewing machines, I remember sewing on my grandmother's. You used your feet to pedal with. And they believe this one was big enough that it would have taken more than one person to operate it. They also said, now this is kind of funny to me, but they said that it might have even been powered by animals, maybe an ox. So if you've ever sewn with kids around, you guard your pedal. So you don't want your finger under that machine when someone would step on your pedal. So it's hard for me to imagine an animal being made to go and stop whenever you wanted it to. But all that is speculation anyway. But they found in this cave in Siberia, they found over 100 needles at one time, and some of them were very advanced. We don't know, they say something like 30,000 years ago, but we're not going to quibble on the time period because we could never figure that out anyway. But I was thinking, where did they lay all this fabric out to work on it? It just boggles the mind to me to think of all this stuff. But we were once in a sewing class. Jessica was on it too. And once in a while, we'd make a quilt that everybody would work on it. We would take the quilting frame and, get everything, the way we wanted it. Our instructor would tell us to sew, try to make your stitches uniform. So you would have 3 or 4 people working this in, some down here. And try as you might, the stitches didn't look the same. And constantly a we were pricking our finger, or we were having to use the seam ripper to take something out, and our leader would have to remind us to tie the threads. But when it was all done, it looked good, and somehow we made it work. But when I think about the tabernacle in the wilderness and the other temple hangings, and the years later, all the work, the priestly garments, the things that God asked them to make or told them to make, I think he required more than just making it work. I think he wanted the best they had to offer, and I think they gave that. But I still think of the human aspect and wonder how they did it. If you've made curtains at home, just simple curtains, you measure, try to get it right, and you hang them up, or at least this is my experience. I look up at them, and one is longer than the other. So you have to try to go back to the drawing board and adjust them. But I think that what they did would have been as perfect as God would have them make it. But I think today, of the people who sewed, the people who are mentioned, the special things, Joseph's coat is mentioned. Jacob made that in love. He probably didn't make it himself. He probably had it made. And then I think of Hannah. Every year, Hannah would go see Samuel at the temple, and she would make a little coat to take to him. This may have just been a mother's love, wanting him to be warm, but it might have been something he wore later in the temple. And I often wonder who made the garments Jesus wore. Did his mother make those? It's I just think sewing was so important, and it was just so underappreciated, I think, by most of us. But there are many ways to serve God. And what I would like for you to take away from this class is that everything we do for God is important. They had to sew for their families just for coverings. And not only the spiritual part of it that God wanted them to do in their worship service, but today we don't have to sew. We can do it if we want to. And if we do want to sew, we can get online and buy a new sewing machine. We can buy fabric. We can get all the cutting tools. What did they cut with? I don't know. This is amazing to me that they could have done that. And they were blessed by God. But I'm amazed at the way sewing has progressed all the way from Adam and Eve down to now. But in the service of God, your role may change throughout the year, or throughout your lives, not just throughout the year. I'm thinking of COVID, I think. But you may start out teaching, playing the piano. Our brothers exhort. But it may later just fall down to those who take people to meeting. There are those who could not go if they didn't have someone who came by to pick them up. There are people who will go buy groceries for people, or take them to get their own groceries. They take them to doctor's appointments. This is very important. But if you reach a point you can't drive to take them somewhere, then pick up the phone or send a text message or a card, just something to let someone know that you're still out there and that you care. But I would like to close this with the reading in Colossians. Colossians 3:14. No, it's 3:17. And whatsoever ye do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by him. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do y'all like her accent?
Thank you, Mary. That was
Oh, you're
interesting.
welcome. Thank y'all for being attentive. I don't have answers, so if you have, I've probably left you with more questions.
I think it's an
Being
interesting.
a sewer and making lots of drapes and so on, it really makes you think and wonder. Thanks, Mary.
Mhm.
I know when we had one sisters class here, my mother-in-law made the same point about making the curtain, because she's always been a great curtain maker. She said if you calculate just how big they were, it was really an enormous task.
Mhm.
I've heard that in the temple, I had asked one time or wondered one time when the curtain was rent from top to bottom, what happened after that? Because the sacrifices and the temple, like all of that still went on. My understanding is till AD 70. And so I don't know, for some reason, I just went down a rabbit trail and was looking for information on that. And I couldn't find anything specific other than they said that they probably had more than one curtain because they would probably take them down and clean them some way, so that they probably did put another one back up. But yeah, I think of all the work that went into that, and then it being torn, which was a beautiful symbol, but the person who made it might have been looking at that askance.
There was a picture several months ago, I think it was the veil you're talking about too, that showed how big it was. They showed a picture of a flag that was hung from a bridge in the United States that hung down over most of the span. Oops, you can't see. Over most of the span of the bridge, and it was huge. It was amazing how big this was. And people said it really helped them have a perspective for how big the temple was in Jesus' day.
I've always heard that was huge, and that's the point, because it was from top to bottom, so only God could have done it.
Mm-hmm. I'll read Sister Deb's comment. She said, "Thanks so much, Sister Mary. I'm reminded of the virtuous woman and Dorcas, both seamstresses. And wasn't the temple veil so heavy that horses had to pull it up?" I'm
Wow.
sure it was quite, I've never heard that, but I mean, you can imagine.
Yeah.
I did a class one time, or I've done it for several ladies classes, and then I just did it for a kids class for the online Bible school, where I took the virtuous woman and the passage and took all the action words and character traits, and then also the results of those actions, and had people try to identify, because we can't all relate to things in that passage, the sowing and the weaving and the buying a vineyard and all that, but we can all look at the actions, the character traits, and how positive those actions were or results were, and find the things in our own lives where we can take those same actions. It says like she strengthened her arms with dignity, and she may have given food to the poor or made clothing for the poor, and maybe we can't cook or sew or whatever, but we can still find a way to give. So
And that was an anagram, right? In alphabetical order. The virtuous one.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Like a acrostic?
Yeah, yeah. That's what it was.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
I was thinking too, weren't the people that helped with the tabernacle, it said, as they were moved. So you would think that some of these people who got to help work on it, maybe it was women who loved to sew. It's like, wow, this, I really am enjoying doing something like that. And I think how much a part of it was in their lives as well. If you think of Samson talking about like comparing a weaver's beam and having his hair woven into a weaver's beam, or Goliath's sword, I think, was the size of a weaver's beam too. So that was pretty big and something that they were very familiar with. Another thing I was thinking about, Kente cloth. Are you familiar with that from West Africa? Those were sewn in little 4-inch wide looms, very long pieces. The men did the weaving in that case, but all of it was made from European cloth, like silks that were unraveled, and then they used that to weave. So as you were talking, Mary, I was wondering if maybe they took some of the Egyptian cloth and undid that and then wove that for the beautiful tapestries for the tabernacle. It'd be interesting.
Possible. And it says also they did embroidery work, and that's so painstaking.
Yeah.
But if they were used to doing this, it wouldn't be the task that it would be for us, even though we have more equipment, that they were just used to it.
Mhm.
Still amazing.
Fine twine linen. Yeah. How
Mhm.
soft
Got
and
it.
beautiful.
One of the things God told them to take in addition to the silver and the gold was garments. And presumably that's the reason why they needed the thread, because they wouldn't have found any flax growing in the wilderness.
No, they wouldn't have had time to do all that too. I think you have to soak it or, prepare it some way to be able to get it in a condition to weave it.
You mentioned that where it said they had wisdom, and you said that they probably had some training or experience, and that that Hebrew word that's translated wisdom literally has to do with skill. So yeah, they would have probably had some skills in that. Let me read another comment by Sister Deb. Josephus reported that the veil was 4 inches thick, was renewed every year, and that horses tied to each side could not pull it apart. Wow.
Wow.
It barred all but the high priest from the presence of God. But when it was torn in two at the death of Jesus of Nazareth, access to God was made available to all who come through him. Perhaps I misunderstood the reference to horses, but that's still, wow.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about a
So
braid,
thick.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say like a string, you can rip apart one, but if you like braid it, it's strong.
A 3-fold cord, right?
That's right.
Not easily broken.
Mary, what you brought to my mind is there's many things like sewing that we don't think about. How did those things get there? When Paul talks about Paul being a tent maker, whether he sewed together tents or some people think he made the special prayer shawls that the men used to pray. Whatever it was would have required a special skill to be, and it was men in that case doing it.
Now you wouldn't want one that leaks, so the seams had to be reinforced.
Yeah, so another thing that they were ordered to do was to embroider tassels on the end of their garments and to embroider the
fringes.
Yeah, the fringes, the tassels, and then embroider the borders of their garments as well.
Which is a completely separate skill from sewing seams.
Right, exactly.
I can't imagine the thickness to sew that. How did they handle it?
I don't know.
Because
They have
with
giant
the
tables.
Our
piece of
machines couldn't handle it.
Yeah. My goodness. Thank you, Mary. That was great.
You're welcome.
I know even North American Indians, to do some of their sewing with leather and their beadwork, they use for needles, and this is just in the last 200 years, the hawthorn, we call them needles, the thorns on the hawthorn tree. And they use that for a needle, even in 200 years back. Like, so it's almost impossible for my brain to get around what kind of needles they would have used, what kind of scissors they would have used, what other equipment, like you're saying, Mary. I mean, I can't even get my head around it.
But to even cut, what did they cut with?
What I'm showing you is a reverse applique. Those are the Indians in Panama that made that, and must take ages. And this is mostly reverse applique. They cheated a bit with some on the top, but that's a lot of work.
Yeah. And Sandra, that's a good point, because in parts of Africa there are, I can't remember what they were called, but there was something we would see it on safaris, like big long thorns that you didn't want to mess with. And so they might have had those in the wilderness even.
Well,
yeah, we have hawthorn. Sorry, we have hawthorn trees here in Oregon, and yeah, the needles are this long because there was one in the neighborhood, and they're sharp. Yeah,
Yeah.
very
Um,
pointy.
There
One of the needles, go ahead, Candy.
I was just going to say, acacia is native to that area, and some of the acacia trees have thorns also.
One of the needles they found, one of the oldest, was made from a bird, a bone of a bird. And of course, archaeologists say that bird has been extinct since, well, for 50,000 years is what they're saying. But we know it's old. So that's how far back they date the needle. But they're still finding things in those caves. I don't know if it's the climate inside the caves. I guess so, but these things were preserves. But I'm still hoping they'll find a sewing machine. I just like to think that they had some help. But even then, it was an amazing task. And not
So,
everybody
Well,
would have.
when you go to China, you can go and watch them make their silk, actually, carpets. And it takes 3 years, and they stand the whole time to do the weaving.
Mhm.
So like it's a very, very long or like
So
difficult job. One carpet.
So I
It's
wanted
like-
to say, I work in art school, so I get to hear things like about creative things and processes. The theory about making fabric starts with crochet, because crochet starts with one needle and then works up to knitting and then weaving. So if we're talking about weaving things, they've already been crocheting things and knitting things before they got there. Probably not big garments because they hadn't figured that part out yet. But so even talking about the fact that they're weaving something means that they've progressed down a road a little bit. And the other comment I have is, so my mom hated the princess thing, the princess thing, little girls wearing princess things, because she said the essence of womanhood was to serve others. And one example of that is that up until we started having machine-made clothes, women spent their evenings either spinning yarn or making clothes or weaving cloth, or, so that their family would be dressed. And it was just another way that women served other people.
Mhm. True.
Margaret, what are you knitting?
An interesting tidbit is that Queen Victoria apparently was a very good knitter. And with all the children that she had, I wonder if she I presume she either did it for her family or she gave it away to others, but I just in the last year found that out. Another thing I was going to mention is sandals. When it says that Moses, well, their sandals period didn't wear out. So how did they put them together? They must have had to do some kind of sewing.
I read something that said they would roll up little pieces of leather or flax or something, but they still had to join them together, like you said.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Even to put the thong in the middle of them, they would have had to do something. They had to have something to cut a hole,
Mhm.
and they had to be able to fasten that so it didn't come loose.
Right.
It's just things I'd never thought about. You just kind of gloss over it and take it for granted, but it's not something to be taken for granted. All of these things required skill.
I've just always wondered when it became okay for Adam and Eve not to wear the skins anymore. But we know it was, because otherwise they'd have been destroyed if they'd have just decided they didn't want to wear them anymore. So maybe it was just until they learned the meaning, but it's still interesting.
Sister Deb had
Well,
another
every sacrifice, as you say, Mary, would have produced new skins.
Mhm.
So
And
they
did
could
wear
have
them all their lives. We don't know.
kept passing them on.
Mhm.
Maybe they made
The other thing that's interesting is the high priest's garment and Jesus's tunic that wasn't to be torn, and it was made so that it didn't really have a seam. I'm not sure how you do that without maybe crocheting or knitting.
You could have crocheted it or knitted it.
They make
Yeah, I just
seamless,
did it.
seamless
I just
underwear
did my
now.
grandson a sweater with no seams. I did it on a circular needle and went round and round
Right,
and round.
but they were made of linen, so
Yeah.
that would make it sort of difficult.
Yep.
I don't know.
I'll read Sister Deb's comment. I grew up across the road from an Amish farm, and I remember watching the Amish mother making rugs out of fabric scraps on a huge loom that filled a small room. Also, I watched them sew their dresses by pedaling their machines since their home had no electricity. Yeah, I never thought about their machines. Yeah, they like some of those scraps are like a quarter of an inch, and it's like you would think it's not even worth it. You know, I don't save anything unless it's 2 feet, and it's crazy.
Make a rag rug, you can use quite small pieces.
Yep.
Sister Donna
One of
Anderson.
my very favorite things in my life that I have discovered that I like above all else in my house, I have a silk duvet, and in China we watched them make the silk duvets from unraveling the cocoon from the mulberry silkworm and taking these fibers and soaking them and then laying them out to make a queen size or a king size duvet. But they are just the most incredible thing because they are so thin and yet so warm and absolutely non-allergic, can't grow any mold, like just an incredible fiber. And that sort of ties in with Deb's talk about the butterfly because they're from a cocoon and they make them into a king size duvet, which is tedious work, believe me. But it's one of the things I really enjoy most in my home because they are just incredible.
You'll have to show us a picture of it sometime.
Yeah, I want to see it when we come
Show
to your place.
Why don't you just take your camera in and show us? You can show and tell.
Well, it's inside a duvet cover, and
it's inside it.
it's just a thin little duvet, but it's warm and comfortable and light as a feather and no mold, no like it's amazing. A silk duvet from the
It's
mulberry.
good in winter and in summer because
Absolutely.
the natural
absolutely.
fiber like that silk does both.
Nobody's allergic to it.
The heat and the
Yeah.
cold.
I was going to tell you how Donna Anderson studied silkworms when she was homeschooling, and just to unravel one of those cocoon took hours, just one little cocoon. There's so much silk in it. It's amazing.
When I was in Nigeria, we went to this little, I was just there for 2 weeks for a volunteer thing. And we went to a little, shop where people had booths. And I got this purse that was made out of all these little fabrics. And they unzipped it to get, it was puffed up. You know how they put the like puffy stuff in it, usually paper. And when she opened it up before she gave it to me and reached in and pulled out all this fabric and started to throw it away. And I said, no, can I have that? And so I brought back all these just like thin strips of all these, it wasn't all like local Nigerian stuff, but I ended up making a little quilted wall hanging out of it. But it's like, don't throw that away.
Like Bogo Lanfini mud cloth, it's that kind of thing.
Sure.
Anyway.
So every time we prick our finger now when we sew, we need to think about how many times the people in the past pricked theirs.
I think
One
of
time-
Rumpelstiltskin, or who was it? Rapunzel that did that?
And Sleeping Beauty too.
Oh yeah.
Oh, how rare sewing machines are. The image of the Fiddler on the Roof just came to mind, the version that I saw. And that the oldest daughter's husband got instead of having to sew by hand, he got a sewing machine that he had to wind, but it would speed up the process of his tailoring. And was that whatever period of time that was supposed to be taking place, they still were doing stuff by hand. They didn't have sewing machines. And I remember as the he was exiting, had it in his arms, carrying it out wherever they were gonna flee to. Like a baby, he wrapped it up in a blanket.
My aunt lived with us when I grew up, right from when I was about 7 till after I married. And she made all our clothes, she made everything, but she wouldn't let us touch a machine. She started off with the pedal machine, and she ended up, she had the most up to date all the time. Well, it was up to date in the 60s, you know. But that's why I've never sewed, because she wouldn't let us touch a machine, and she did everything. If I needed something sewing, give it to me, I'll do it for you. So I never bothered sewing.
My mother started us off on little napkins, like hand sewing napkins and any little scraps. And but my nephews, when they were probably 3, they would beg to do the pedal for you, and they got pretty good at, like,
That's how they started out.
yeah, you have to stop when we say stop. And now they come over and they say, what can I sew? Can I make a pillow? And they do all kinds of stuff.
That's neat.
It's a life skill. It's a life skill they need.
Right.
Was that Sister Yates, Margaret?
Yeah, my Aunt Mildred.
Yeah, because Mum and her were very friendly, and because my mum was a seamstress as well, and they used to get together to discuss sewing. And I wasn't allowed to touch Mum's machine either.
My mother was happy to teach us to sew because that meant less work for her. And as we girls learned to sew for ourselves, then she only had to do the younger ones. And we grew up sewing.
Yeah, sometimes I regret it. I could if I'm a bit lazy when it comes to that, really. But I should.
It's never
Martha,
late.
when I think of it, would you please thank Mike for everything he does? And I'm so delighted to get to know him.
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you.
Well, any other comments or topics? We were a little early today, so we keep
I just
chatting.
want to say that was so interesting, Mary.
It was.
I sat on my porch. I sat on my porch today, and I've lost track of how many butterflies have flown by.
Oh yeah, we've had a lot.
Which has been really special.
We get the monarch butterflies here, Phyllis.
We get those little white things that are
they
eating our
migrate
plants.
to Mexico, all the way, and we're fairly north in Ontario. They migrate, and you know what?
Longest migrations, I believe, don't they?
Yeah, it's thousands of years of miles. But you know what's really interesting as well is, you know, these monarch butterflies, when they go hatch into butterflies in the pupa stage, normally their lifespan is maybe another 4 to 6 weeks maximum. But the ones that are hatched out just before the migration, around September, they live for 9 months.
Oh.
Now you say that's not a creator. I mean, how could that just happen out of coincidence? Right. And you know, and then of course that they're the butterflies that hatch in Mexico. They've never been, but they find their way all the way back.
Yeah, yeah.
Wonderful God creation is just overwhelming.
Someone should do a class on the metamorphosis. And one thing I didn't know about that until recently is there's no cellular similarity between a caterpillar and a butterfly. Like it completely turns to goo and
goo, absolutely
reforms, and the cells are completely different. There's nothing, it's not literally a new creation.
It is. It's incredible.
Absolutely, totally different eyes. I mean, a caterpillar has eyes and a butterfly has eyes, but their eyes are nothing similar.
There's nothing about them that's the same. They go into a liquid, almost like a liquid, and they form a new creature. There's a wonderful lot of lessons from that. Yeah.
Betty Winfrey's on. He did a class on that for younger people.
Oh, we should get hold of Betty. She's the one.
What I think is amazing on the chrysalis for the monarch is the little gold dots. They look like pure gold. That is amazing.
And the only plant that they will eat is the milkweed. And so they're sort of saying when they work their way back from Mexico, it's as the milkweed develops in different parts of the country, as it, it's later further north in Ontario, and they work their way through, and I guess feeding on the milkweed on the way.
In God's time.
Yeah.
Sister Deb just said that when we were talking about the caterpillar to the butterfly is like baptism, which is true. They have to go through a liquid state to be reborn.
Yeah.
Anyone have a dog or cat they want to show us?
I think I'm going to go because I've got things that I've got.
I have to go hunt my cat now.
Oh, Martha's going to show us a fish.
I just made a leopard actually, getting ready for camp. It looks more like an owl now that
Yeah,
I
it
look.
does.
It does look like an owl, yeah.
Thought it was an owl.
We'll have to work on that. We're doing the kingdom at camp next week, Lord willing, and we're going to do leopards and lions. So.
Would someone, I had sent Marcia a message asking her to do a closing prayer, but I don't think she ever saw it. So would someone, Sandra, would you be willing to do that?
Heavenly Father, we're a group of your dear sisters, your daughters and sisters to Christ, and we appreciate and do not take for granted any of the blessings that we've had in our lives. We are so blessed, and this class has been so uplifting, giving us things for thought to see you in our lives, to acknowledge that your timing is always the right timing, that you are in control of this universe and in our lives, and you have a plan for each one of us. And we appreciate that, Lord, because we all need direction. We all need goals and purpose in our life. And we know that you only want the best for each one of us. We praise you and give you thanks and look forward to this coming week when we can serve you, because we know that Jesus taught us that serving is what is there for us to do. And I think it's an advantage to be a woman because we have so many opportunities to serve. And that to me is beneficial. Thank you, Lord, for all your blessings. Through Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of these months, I'd like to have a bring a friend month, or share the link with a friend. And so be thinking, I mean, you're welcome to do that any month, but July might be a good month to do that because it's summer and it's hot. People want to be inside. So consider inviting a friend next time. All right. See you all later.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Happy
Thank
Labor
you.
Day.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.